Hello, everyone. This is Scott Roberts from Explore Scientific and the Explore Alliance, and you're watching Eclipse Experience. And we have a very special guest on today, Dr. Ralph Chou. He is the world's leading expert on eye safety, especially when it comes to, and he's made, especially where it's concerning eclipses. Aside from that, he is the professor emeritus of Waterloo University in Canada. His research has been in optical properties of ophthalmic lens materials and ocular media, environment and industrial ocular hazards, optical radiation effects on the eye, impact resistance of spectacle lenses and frames, and eye protection standards. He wrote the book on the ISO standards for eclipse filter safety, and so it's my pleasure to bring on Dr. Chou. Thank you for coming on to Eclipse Experience. Here, I'll just come on with you here. Here we go. All right. So thank you very much. I'm really honored to have you on. We were talking earlier, and the last time I had seen you has to be over maybe 15 years ago, something like that, where you were a featured speaker at the Hands on the Sun conference in Tucson, Arizona, with Coronado, the solar telescope maker, had invited you as a special guest. And I think that you probably did a lot of safety testing for that company.
Yes, that's right. I do some of the safety tests before that product went onto the market.
Right.
It was a great little study, and of course, it revolutionized solar observing in the sense that the Lunt family produced these wonderful H-alpha filters, which were really accessible.
Right. And low cost, for their performance, I thought.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're superb instruments, and of course, David has passed on now, and one of his sons is now
Andy. Yeah, Andy still has Lunt Optical and continues to make some fantastic solar products there for H-alpha and calcium, maybe a couple of other wavelengths as well. But I'm curious, Dr. Chou, I mean, if you talk, if you want to know about where these standards and stuff come from, of course, Dr. Chou's name comes up a lot. But I know that you're also, a sun enthusiast. You like observing the sun. I see lots of photos of you with your telescopes and out there checking out the sun. What got you into all of this?
I saw my first solar eclipse when I was 12 years old, and it did something to me. And, I think all of us who have been eclipse aficionados over the years have had similar experiences where you have that seminal moment that sort of fixes your path. And for me, it's seeing this solar eclipse when I was 12. And over the years, I got more and more interested in looking at the sun and studying astronomy. I eventually got my degree in astronomy before going into optometry. And I happened to be entering into the academic world at the time when a lot of optometrists were interested in environmental and occupational safety. And I just happened to fill the right niche. And, it just went from there. For the last 40 odd years, I've been working in the areas of radiation and mechanical hazard safety. And, the result was that I developed the expertise to evaluate these types of equipment, and, got involved with the standards development world as well.
Going back to when you were 12 years old, that experience of seeing the eclipse and everything, do you think that that was kind of a gateway to entering into this scientific, technical field?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was 1963, and so
Oh, wow.
this was an eclipse that a lot of my contemporaries also saw, and had it had the same effect on them, and it just went from there.
Right.
And the hard thing is that I think all of us who have stood under the moon's umbra and seen a total solar eclipse, we know what that feeling is like when totality occurs. It's overwhelming. It's awesome. You are sometimes lost for words to describe how you feel at it.
Exactly.
But it's an unmistakable feeling, and to know that this is going on, and it's beyond your control, but it's awesome and it's wonderful. There's an emotional component to it too. And you see this with people who, a lot of my colleagues who are in the eclipse observing, who are very sober-minded scientists, and we're all the same. When that totality goes off, we just lose it.
Yes.
It's cathartic. It's a really wonderful feeling, and we all share the same experience.
Sure. My first experience to see a total eclipse was in '91, and I got picked to go to Mauna Kea to witness that eclipse. So I'm setting up cameras and stuff for this film crew, and they picked me because they knew I could polar align an equatorial mount. It wasn't because I had any expertise in eclipses at all. I didn't. But the thing I witnessed was professional astronomers running out of the CFHT, and their jaws were just dropped. I mean, they were just ogling this spectacle that was out in front of us. And I totally can understand your description of what it's like. And for all of you people who have never seen a total eclipse, this is something you definitely got to do because it is life-changing. So, but let's talk a little bit about eye safety and what it was like in the early '60s when you saw your total eclipse. Were you using? There was no ISO standard, I assume, at that time, and for eclipse glasses or anything like that. What did people do back then?
Well, back in those days, there were a couple of things that were advised for watching solar eclipses. One was to use just a pinhole, punch a hole in a small pinhole in a piece of aluminum foil, put it onto the end of a box, and project the image, like a pinhole camera. Of course, the problem is that the size of the image is pretty small. It's about a 400th of the length of your box. You're looking at this teeny tiny crescent sun,
right,
at the end of the box, and I did that, and it was interesting.
Sure.
Couldn't see much, but it did the job. And then people started talking about using welding filters to look at the partially eclipsed sun. uh, there wasn't much rhyme or reason to it. It was just, oh yeah, this one looks comfortable to view the sun.
Okay, so whatever didn't strain your eyes, I
Yeah,
guess,
it was
was
just
okay.
if it didn't, yeah, if it didn't end up with with unnecessary glare and after images, then it was probably safe. And at that time there really wasn't a great deal known about what the effects of sun gazing like that would be. And now, mind you, the thing is that uh, the medical world knew about solar sun-related eye damage uh,
Sure.
fairly well on, because the experience of air crews in World War II was where they got a lot of their information. And then, of course, there were the Army tests in the Nevada deserts with letting off atomic bombs in the early 1950s, where
Sure.
the idea was let off a tactical atomic warhead and then go in and clean up afterward. And so they had these legions of foot soldiers who were lined up to look at the fireball and see whether they got eye damage, blah blah blah. These are the kind of experiments that
Man.
get you permanently banned from research today. But in those days it was pretty free and easy. But we learned a lot about what the tolerance of the eye is to radiant energy as a result. And then, as the medical community started to develop diagnostic and therapeutic tools that used light, it became more and more important for us to know what the long-term effects of light exposure would be on the back of the eye, among other things. And so, I got into this at about that time,
Mm-hmm.
the 1970s, 1980s, when this was really an active area of research. And I had the opportunity to study and work with a lot of the pillars of that particular research area
Mm-hmm.
in those years.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it came to talking about solar eclipse eye safety, I had all the tools I needed to talk about it, not to
Mm-hmm.
mention the fact that being an astronomer originally, I actually knew what I was talking about, which
Right.
was not something that you found very much in the advice of the day from eye care practitioners about how to look at a solar eclipse. There were very few people at the time who had that dual background who could.
Sure. I would say it's rare now. I mean,
Yeah,
still, so,
that's
right.
right. And so, that gave me that niche to get involved in eye safety programs. I qualified as an optometrist in 1979, and in the year previous, I had started to do some research work as part of my final year research on solar filters. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so I actually got involved with the Canadian optometrist eye safety program for the February 1979 eclipse.
I
And
see.
I flew out to Gimli, Manitoba to watch that eclipse, 25 below centigrade
Wow.
for the entire eclipse. My camera froze, my telescope froze,
Yeah.
got the images, but
Maybe the image of the eclipse froze in your mind, even. Just kidding.
everything froze.
Right. Uh, well, let's talk a little bit about what does happen. I mean, all of us. I mean, certainly as children, and throughout your life, you will see, the sun directly, okay, without any eye protection at all. Of course, it's very hard to look at for any amount of time. You see the sun, you're like, whoa, that's bright, and you have kind of this natural instinct, I think, to look away. But what does happen, with prolonged exposure to the eye?
Well, it
And
very
that, and
much.
that and that latent image. I mean, I've had like purple streamers that I see, and then they just kind of fade, and
Yeah.
so.
Well, the thing is that the eye has developed some safety mechanisms to prevent the eye from frying, if you will.
Hmm.
But the problem is that if you override that aversion reflex, for example, and try to look at a very, very bright object like the sun, then if you have an image that is relatively stable on the back of the eye for an extended period of time, then what will happen is that the light energy gets absorbed by the cells at the back of the eye, and through a number of different chemical reactions that are mediated by the light, you develop damage inside the light-sensitive cells at the back of the eye. And it is wavelength dependent. So what we find is that blue and green light is much more effective at damaging the eye than, say, red or yellow light. It's about 1,000 times difference between the
Oh, wow.
end and the red end of the spectrum for this kind of damage. And of course, again, if we think about what is going on, when we look at eclipses, most of us are going to look at an eclipse when it is fairly high in the sky, around midday, or, you know, at a time when the sun appears sort of whitish
Yeah.
in the sky, which means that you're getting the full load of solar radiation in the blue and the green, and it's therefore potentially most damaging. Now, why is it that you can look at, say, sunrise or sunset and not hurt your eyes? Well, it's because when the sun is below 15 degrees elevation, you are actually looking through about four air masses of atmosphere. So a single air mass is what you would get if the sun were directly overhead at the zenith. Then you've just got the thickness of the atmosphere. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And the lower you go, the more and more air you have to get through. And what saves us at sunrise and sunset is the fact that that additional pathway through the atmosphere scatters out the blue light. That's why you end up with a red sun.
Right.
And like I said earlier, the red light is much less effective at causing any kind of damaging effects than the blue and green. And so you're safe as long as the sun looks red.
I see.
The rest of the time, if you look long enough, you will set up these photochemical reactions as well as some secondary thermal effects, which occur because the excess light gets absorbed by the pigment that lines the eyeball. And what's happening is the pigment absorbs that light, converts it into heat, and not only do you have these photochemical reactions, but you also now are generating highly localized thermal reactions.
Not good.
And they are the ones that are actually really damaging, because your eye can actually absorb some of that photochemical damage and eventually recover from it. But if you get the thermal damage, it's permanent. And so, that's the problem. And the additional difficulty is that all of this goes on. You can fry your eye, as it were, and you won't know it because you have no pain sensation. The only indication is that, about 8 to 12 hours after the actual damage has occurred, those cells stop working, and you suddenly realize you can't see.
Yeah.
The result is that in most cases of eclipse eye damage, the people don't know that their eyes are dead men walking until the next morning. They look in the bathroom mirror, they look across the breakfast table, and they realize that
it's like maybe like a hole or something that they can't see.
Yeah, there's an area right in the center of the visual field that's punched out. That's very blurred, or it might even be a gray patch, depending on how much damage has occurred. And by then, of course, it's too late. And all we can do is look at it, evaluate it, and say, well, we're going to have to wait for a few months to see whether you recover.
See if it recovers. Wow. Um, uh, I think about the history of solar observing, and this starts with Galileo. Of course, he would not have known about any kind of filters or anything like that. And I had heard of, and maybe it's not even true, okay? But I'd heard that he had suffered, his vision had suffered from observing the sun. But I heard also that he projected the sun through his
Yes.
telescope. What's
Yeah.
the truth there?
Well, if you look at Galileo's writings, it is plain from the writings that, in fact, he used an astronomical refractor design to project an image of the sun, and that's how he observed sunspots and so on.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that it was dangerous to try to look through his telescope at the sun. There is a lot of mythology about Galileo's eyesight, but it would appear that what probably more than likely anything else affected his vision was what we see nowadays, cataract and glaucoma.
I see.
Those are what took out his vision, and it had nothing to do with the sun. The interesting thing is that Galileo was really cagey. I look on him as one of the first people to take advantage of the military-industrial complex.
Right.
He sold the telescope to the Venetians with the idea that it could be used to spot the navy of Genoa on the horizon, so they wouldn't be surprised with their ships in the harbor and trapped. He was the first person to do that kind of thing that I know of.
Do you, I'm just kind of going off topic just a little bit, but do you think that Galileo, and I know about that, okay, do you think that Galileo demonstrated views of astronomical objects just to prove how far away and with how much detail, greater detail, could be seen with the telescope for a military reason?
I think it was scientific curiosity as well as
Okay.
military applications.
Both.
Again, if you take a look at his writings, he obviously was thinking out of the box, way outside the box.
Okay.
And, he certainly had an entrepreneurial bent to it. And he was looking for ways of taking advantage of this newfangled device. And, that's a story in itself.
Sure it is.
But,
Sure.
the thing is that he demonstrated so many things that were key to our understanding of how the universe works. Truly a scientific revolutionary. And again, when we take a look at even how we observe the sun today, it all goes back to Galileo's realization that you could safely observe the sun, and went from there.
Right. So, and how did Galileo understand that he couldn't just look through his telescope and observe the sun directly? I mean, was it just common sense, or was he aware? Because there were people that had like spy glasses and stuff. I'm sure some people got some eye damage. Maybe you'd heard of it. I don't know.
It's possible. It's hard to say because, again, there's certain things he's left out of his writings.
Yeah.
Deliberately.
Deliberately.
There are certain secrets that he wanted to keep secret.
Yeah.
So that you could pay him to tell about the secrets. But
right.
In any case, certainly I think he realized that burning glasses exist.
Sure.
Sun can be used to burn things. So
he might have had one, right? So
very possibly. So I think he was cagey enough about it that he knew projection was the way to go at the time, because he didn't have a way of getting a dark filter. Now, mind you, Jay Pasakoff, for example, had a collection of antique solar viewers that he collected over the years. And in 2017, as we were setting up in Salem, Oregon to observe the solar eclipse that day, Jay actually showed me this lovely little French solar viewer that he had picked up. It was made out of ivory and it had a green glass filter in it.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that we were going to do before, I think it happened just before he found out he was ill. And we'd never had a chance to follow up on it. But what we had hoped to do was to actually get that filter and make some measurements of it to see exactly what its transmission qualities were. Because I looked at it and I felt that I knew what it was going to be like. But, it was just one of those things where we had a quick chat and then it was time to get set up to observe. We never managed to follow.
Right.
But
it does show that people have been observing or trying to observe the sun for a long time.
Yes, and quite successfully and safely. It's all flying by the seat of your pants. But, the thing is that there are ways of developing these safety devices, and over the years, that's been the way to go. But, in our modern society where, we have to certify things are safe and so on, that's where the standards come in. And so, just last year, Stephen Dane from the University of New South Wales, Rick Feinberg from the American Astronomical Society, and I published a paper in the Astronomical Journal evaluating a number of solar filters that we'd collected from the 2017 eclipse.
Right.
And, it was interesting to see what the results were like. And, in fact, what we found was that some of the filters were just too dark. If the sun wasn't at the zenith, you couldn't use the filter. It was so dark.
Right.
And there were others that were bright. You looked through them at the sun and they were uncomfortably and so on. So there's still a lot of work to be done on refining the technology.
Sure.
But, at least we know that the standard that we developed for, in 2015 for preparing for the 2017 eclipse at least put up some barriers to stuff that would be blatantly unsafe.
Right. Out of that 2017 eclipse, I had heard of only one report, and maybe there were others that did suffer some eye damage. I don't know. Is there any estimate of how many people suffer from solar eye damage each year, or is there any kind of record kept?
This is one of the problems that we have, that it's not a reportable type of injury or illness. So there's no central registry of these things. But what we did do in 2017 was we put out to eye care practitioners requests for information about eye injuries that occurred as a result of looking at the eclipse. And what we found in Canada and the US, so we're talking a population of about 350 million people. We had 100 cases reported.
100 cases. Wow.
100 cases. And most of them were relatively minor. The typical one was from a colleague of mine who practices in, where was it? Somewhere in the Midwestern states. 17-year-old boy turned up the next morning with a mild case of eclipse damage. Fit my profile to a T.
Right.
But, it was classical case of eye damage. He recovered from it uneventfully. He's got a little bit of a scar, but his vision is basically the same as it was before the eclipse. So he was lucky. And there have been a couple of other cases that have been very exhaustively documented. There's this one case that was a young woman in New York City who injured her eye on that day, and uh, the ophthalmologists went to town with every diagnostic device they had. And the paper is really an interesting read.
Hmm.
There's nothing particularly new and different about it, except for the fact that they were able to get all of this evidence on a living eye. Whereas, when I started off doing this research back in the 80s, the only way that you could actually prove what was going on was to actually, physically cut up the eye and take a look at it under an electron microscope and so on. But we
Probably
have
not a lot of volunteers for that.
well, yeah, exactly. It's pretty hard to do that on a human,
Right.
but we now have the technology that we can actually get to the level of the individual retinal cells and see them in the living eye and assess them. And so this particular paper was particularly instructive because they had that data, they had the images, and it's really something to see all this in the living eye to fit in with what I knew from the work that was done in the 1980s and 90s.
Wow. Okay. So there must be some sort of probe or something that can go in and check these things out. I don't know, but this is very interesting.
Technologies.
I met only one person that I knew for a fact had eye damage. He comes into our shop and he was not able to look at me directly. He could only see me through averted vision. And he explained to me that he had been at a baseball game, had used binoculars, he had had a few too many beers, and he had slowly crossed the sun with his binoculars, and this part of his eye, of course, didn't work anymore. And so that was it really brought home the fact that you need to do this safely. Of course, during that time too, I'm starting to sell some eclipse filters for telescopes, and we should probably talk about that a little bit because all of the safety standards for eclipse filter material is made for zero, from my understanding anyways, zero power, not looking through an instrument of any kind, okay? This is just filters in front of your eyes. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. And the reason for that is it goes back to a controversy that I was involved with in the run up to the 1999 total eclipse that occurred over Europe, and the path of totality went from Cornwall across Central Europe and into Russia.
Okay.
So it was a huge area to deal with. And what had happened was that, as you're aware, we have when we get these types of solar viewer, you can have either the dark polymer lens or the aluminized mylar or aluminized polyester film. And there was a competition between the manufacturers for the market in Europe. And there was an allegation made that the aluminized polyester films were unsafe because they had pinholes. And so I got right up to here in the discussion, including being sent across the pond to do a tour of England to talk about the relative safety or otherwise. And it eventually went to a court case where I was one of the expert witnesses. But
wow,
the controversy over this type of device was so high across Europe that the European Union decided that they needed to have some kind of a standard for solar viewers. And what they did was they took advantage of European regulation related to personal protective equipment. And they said, we will consider a solar viewer to be a specialized form of sunglass.
Hmm.
So between 1999 and 2005, the European Committee for Standardization developed the standard uh, for sunglasses that were intended for direct viewing of the sun. And
I see.
that's the EM standard, which was in place for many, many years. Now, it gets more complicated in that uh, at the time that the Europeans were doing this, the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, decided that they needed to develop global standards, and they entered into an arrangement with the European Committee that as ISO developed product standards, they would phase out the EM standard. And this was when I got involved in the international standards group. Previous to that, I had been involved in the Canadian and American standards.
Hmm.
This put me into the global standards community.
And what year, what time frame is this?
We're now talking, let's see, I started working in the ISO committees in the late 90s. And
Oh, wow. Okay.
the actual development of the ISO standard for solar viewers began in around 2010.
Wow. Okay, so it's that recent. Okay.
It's not recent, and the problem is that when you're dealing with a global standard like this, you have a lot of interested parties. So
Sure.
you learn a lot of diplomacy in doing this stuff.
I see.
And I ended up dealing with all sorts of people, and the standards committees. You're typically dealing with 40 or 50 people around the table, all with uh, very strongly held viewpoints. So you
Right.
learn diplomacy and you learn the art of leading them where you want them to go.
I see.
So,
Were
um,
some of these people, maybe you can't answer this, but were some of these people also involved in manufacturing these kinds of filters or?
Actually, no. That
Hmm.
was the interesting part because, for the most part, these are people who do industrial protectors, welding
Okay.
filters, and things like that. But nobody from the solar viewer communities, actually.
I see.
So none of the big three that are, in the world recognized as leaders in making solar filters was represented. And partly it's because it's not cheap to be involved in standards development because there's a lot of travel. Until COVID came along, you know, you're spending a week at a foreign place all over the globe.
Hmm.
These meetings take you everywhere,
Wow. Okay.
and you've got to have the financial resources to be able to actually afford to be involved in it.
I see.
Since I retired, it's become somewhat more difficult.
Hmm.
But the thing is that uh, you you just have to figure out how to pony up the money. But the thing is that in looking at this, they they had the standard in place, the EM standard. ISO decided that they should develop something, and partly it was because we knew that the 2017 eclipse was coming, and
Sure.
there were a few of us who wanted to get it rolling. So we actually got the agreement of the technical committee to start a work group, which I led, and or a project group rather, and we developed the standard, and then it was a matter of dotting the i's, crossing the t's, and all of that, and making sure that the standard fit in English, French, German, and Russian,
Hmm.
and Chinese.
Okay. And Chinese. Wow. Okay. So we've got these eclipses coming into the United States. You know, I suspect, and what I hear from the experts out there, that this will be the 2024 total eclipse may be the world's greatest or most viewed eclipse of all time. And, eclipse glass safety is going to be paramount. What do you see on the forefront here? I mean, you've got, I know that there is, or I've heard that there's a new ISO standard being written, and I assume that you're involved in that. Are there going to be major changes, or do you think that basically it's just going to be clarifying some points in the current standard?
It'll be clarifying some points. Like I said, we found that there were some filters that were just too dark. So
I see.
to adjust the transmissions limits for these filters so that it'll be a more appropriate range of acceptable transmittance levels.
Mm-hmm.
We have to take into account the fact that in addition to the cardboard viewers that you've got on your desk, for example,
Yeah, like these.
These types of devices, which are square,
Yep.
that are held in front of the eyes. And we also have devices like this product here, which is actually a real frame with the filter lenses inserted into them. The standard will have to be able to deal with these kinds of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the problem will be that the development of a standard of this sort is going to take a while. And I don't think that it's likely that we will see the standard in place for 2023 or 2024, because the viewers that are being made for those eclipses are being made now.
Now, that's right.
You have to keep in mind that we're dealing with a market of a couple of 100 million people who might want to get these filters for those eclipses.
That's right. That's right.
It takes the manufacturers a certain amount of time to die cut the cardboard and assemble the filters and put them all together. So they're doing that. They started last year, in fact.
Yeah, we're one of those manufacturers as well, and so we are busy lining up. I mean, just the sales mechanism of this, and but also getting everything lined up with the actual manufacturer that makes the die cuts, stamps out these filters, and just really there's quite a bit to do, and making sure that you're getting all the certifications done and all of that, and so we're busy with that at this point. Well, if I go back, rewind a little bit back to 2017, we had the debacle of Amazon discovering that there were a lot of fake and counterfeit eclipse glasses. I was interviewed on national news for this myself, and Amazon basically did a $60 million refund, an instant refund, because you had this mix of bad product with good product, and I guess Amazon could not figure out, okay, we don't have enough time to figure this out, so let's just refund everybody. And that made for a really crazy few weeks before the eclipse.
Yeah, I remember when that broke, and my phone was ringing off the hook, and my emails were piling up.
So were mine.
Sorted out. It was pretty horrible. Yeah, and the thing is, it didn't have to happen that way. It shouldn't have happened, but well, history being what it was, it did happen. So hopefully we've learned something, and it's not going to happen again. I do know that I actually had communication from an importer of some Chinese-made solar filters who actually had his shipment impounded by U.S. Customs.
Wow.
And destroyed.
And destroyed. Wow.
You
Okay,
know,
that probably was a lot of money. So,
yeah, and you know, this is one of the things that we're finding out, that customs are on this. They're being very watchful about it, and to the extent that they are able to, they are trying to make sure that anything that's shady doesn't get across
yeah,
the border. But you know, even assuming that that happens, and you block the majority of those shipments, there's still going to be some porosity. I don't see that there's going to be any
sure.
way for them to do that at every port of entry. So there will inevitably be something that comes in, and the only thing we can do is, if there's inquiries, you know, the AAS has their Eclipse program set up.
Right.
And Rick and I are still available to assess things and try to figure out whether a particular device is safe or not. But you know, it's one of those things that we're hoping will not bug this eclipse as much as it did in 2017.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. I mean, the stories are just, all over the place as well. There were a lot of educational, schools that had planned on letting all the kids witness, the partial phases of the eclipse with eclipse glasses, and they were terrified that they might have gotten something that wasn't right. Um, and I know for a fact some of these schools did get things that were not correct, and but a lot of schools did get good eclipse glasses, and they just prevented the kids from witnessing this incredible spectacle, which is really a shame because. As we talked about earlier, that gateway of witnessing a astronomical event like an eclipse is something that can lead to a life of a technical career or a science career. But my experience in just being involved in the telescope industry, I witnessed again and again people that had a positive experience in astronomy, whether that was just seeing Saturn for the first time or witnessing an incredible event like an eclipse, kind of sealed the deal for them to study harder, to get more interested in natural sciences, science in general, so I kind of see that these kids that were prevented from seeing this amazing eclipse were kind of stunted in a way, and that's my take on it. I don't know if you share that, but I think you do.
Well, you know, I remember in 1994, we had an annular or partial eclipse. Or was it annular here? I forget now, but I
Yeah,
anchored.
I think it was an annular eclipse.
It was an annular eclipse, and I was the anchor for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's nationwide television coverage
Hmm,
for the Science Center in Toronto. I took
wonderful.
my son out of school. He spent the whole day wandering around the Ontario Science Center and occasionally looking at the sun and so on. Uh,
Sure.
but again, it was one of those types of events where uh, a lot of parents are likely to pull the kids out of school if necessary to ensure that they see the eclipse. Now the thing is, the 2023 annular eclipse is on a Saturday, I think it is. So it's on the weekend. The schools are not going to be involved with that, other than maybe talking about the physics of an eclipse and what to do. But the teachers are not going to have anything to say about that one in terms of
Right.
kids being able to see it. But the 2024 eclipse is on a Monday afternoon, and through much of the path in the United States, it is during school hours. By the time it gets into Canada, it'll be just at the end of the school day. And that leads to
Okay.
all sorts of interesting quandaries. Do you keep the kids, do you keep the kids after school for a while and disrupt their bus schedules and everything else so they get a chance to see this with their classmates, or do you let them go home? And and take their chances,
Hmm.
that's going to be really a problem for Eastern Ontario and Quebec.
Hmm.
But by the time you get into the maritime provinces in Newfoundland, it'll be into the late afternoons. And the kids will have been out of school for an hour or so. So again, they'll be beyond reach of the school boards and the teachers. Uh,
Right.
but it leads to all sorts of interesting conjectures about exactly how to deal with this eclipse, or with these eclipses, because of the fact that you want to make sure that people observe it in safety. And both the U.S. and Canadian astronomers are working very hard to ensure that the educational programs are out there to tell people how to observe them, all of the other things. So,
So,
I'm hopeful it'll work, but I'm sort of a little bit concerned as well. So we'll have to see.
sure. Well, just being, kind of subjected to the fire of all those inquiries and stuff that happened in 2017. I was involved in that as well. I got incredible amounts of phone calls, and it tied up all of our resources, with our customer service staff, our sales staff, and all of that. And frankly, there are a lot of people that were in the industry of serving this that don't want to repeat this. Okay, they don't they hated what they went through, with people angry or whatever. I mean, that tidal wave of people that were concerned or waited too late. This is another problem that happened. Amazon had refunded all $60 million in Eclipse glasses just weeks before the eclipse happened, and now the reliable vendors were taking the brunt of having to serve it up, and so that was really, really tough. So what is being recommended to say as far or to communicate as far as vetting that you're getting something that's safe, that you don't have any worries about, because we do want as many people as possible to safely observe this and just really have, an amazing experience.
I think one of the critical things is that the people who are actually retailing these products to the public
Hmm.
need to make sure they're buying them from people who are well established in the marketplace as reliable sources.
Yes.
There are a number of companies, including yours, that are doing this, are producing the filters, and those are the ones that people really should be going to get their stock. The second thing is that the manufacturers themselves have to ensure that they have the proper certifications, so you can demonstrate to a consumer that, in fact, you have had your products assessed to be in compliance with the standards, and that you can say, yeah, we have the certification and it is valid. And this is really important, that the certification has to come from a testing laboratory that actually is accredited by the testing laboratories organizations
Hmm.
as competent to do the testing. Because this is one of the things that we found in 2017, that we were getting technical reports claiming compliance with the standard,
Yeah.
but the testing house was not actually certified themselves as being competent to do the testing.
Oh,
They
wow.
were authorized, for example, to test against the European toy standard,
Yeah.
but not the ISO standard for eye protectors, which is what you need in order to be certifying these products. And
Hmm.
so the actual accreditation of the testing laboratory has to be established.
Hmm.
And
And who does this oversight on these laboratories?
There are a number of different organizations that that actually do this. It's a relatively small number, but these are organizations that will go into a testing laboratory and check their standard operating procedures, check their equipment, and ensure that their staff are competent to operate the equipment and that they have the right procedures in place to perform the testing and issue reports. It depends on the country. It depends on the area of the world. There are a number of these umbrella organizations in Europe, the United States, and North America in general, Australasia, and so on, where they will do these kinds of things. And it's just simply you ask the testing house who has accredited you and for what, and they should be able to tell you. As long as you're assured that they have the right credentials, then you can have them do the tests, and you can be sure that the certification they issue is valid.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that in an ideal world, this would happen at the manufacturer level, but it could be at the distributor or retailer level as well.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's just we recognize that it's not a cheap or inexpensive process.
No.
These are
these tests cost thousands to perform. Yes.
Yeah, but then the stakes are high as well.
Yes.
The thing is that for an ISO standard compliance test, yes, it costs you a lot, but it opens the door for you to market your product in the European Union. So that's about 200 million people.
Right.
And it's similar to, testing against an ANSI standard, which will open the door for you to market your products in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So when you take a look at it in terms of per capita cost, it then
is worth it, provided you have that capital.
There is that.
Right.
And it is a problem in that, yes, these are very expensive tests because it takes time. And,
sure.
I at one point I thought about having my own research lab credentialed.
Mm-hmm.
But when I found out how much it would cost, I didn't have the cash flow to afford it. So there was no way that I could do it.
Sure.
But the point is that these testing houses exist, and they do put out the money to to make their
sure.
reports,
sure. That's right. Well, wow, this has been a very interesting subject, Dr. Chou. There's nothing more important during an eclipse than to observe it safely. I'm really happy that there's been someone in the world like yourself that has done so much to make the public safe during these times of an eclipse. We touched on a little bit about filters, over the lens filters, which are the type you should use for a telescope. Back when we were kids, certainly there were a lot of inexpensive refractors sold with the green solar filter that would screw into the eyepiece or whatever. And were actually quite dangerous, when pointed at the sun. I remember in 1983 there was a partial eclipse going over Texas. I was at the Texas Star Party, and we had a film crew. There was a television news crew out there, and they put one of these screw-in type of filters, which aren't sold anymore, aren't available, hopefully not available anymore. But if you have an old telescope that has one of these things, absolutely don't use it, because they're green. They had the word sun engraved on it or whatever, and But when we pointed it at the sun and had it tracking, you could hear a crack, a pop happen. We had a piece of white paper right above the eyepiece. We didn't stick anybody's eyes up to it. And you could see the sunlight coming right through to the paper itself. And
I had
that didn't take very long for that to
I
happen.
actually had two of my friends who had their eyes damaged that way.
Wow. Good Lord. Yeah. There's a question here from one person watching in the audience on Facebook, is Jim Baker watching. He says, is there a minimum absorbance or maximum percent T in the blue-green that we can see as acceptable? My filters seem to allow 0.01% T when I place them in a spectrometer.
That's at the upper edge of the level of transmission for the filter. I would be happier with a level at around 0.003%.
0.003%.
Yeah.
Okay. So we need to move a decimal point over.
Yeah, it's 0.01. You're really, that is a risky filter. It's not blatantly unsafe, but I would be careful with it. Within the standard, we have a range of acceptable levels of transmission. 0.01, that's really right on the upper edge of, where you're going to end up with possibly some after images if you look at the sun for an extended period of time. But after images merely indicate that you've overloaded the photoreceptors, but you probably have not damaged them. And this is the thing that.
How do you know, though? I mean,
it's
guesswork, right?
It's really hard without knowing what the transmission, spectral transmittance is of that filter. Because one of the other things that sort of clouds this whole thing is that the specification in the standard is for luminous transmittance. So we're actually doing a measurement of the physical transmittance of the filter across the visible spectrum. And then we apply a mathematical model of the spectral sensitivity of the human eye. We get some indication of how bright the sun would be if you looked through it. So it's a measure of the apparent brightness. That's luminous transmittance, and that's the requirement that's actually built into the standard. So it is possible to have a higher luminous transmittance, but mainly because of the fact that you're predominantly in the yellow and the red. Or it could be high because you're high in the blue end, where it's potentially more damaging. And it's a spectral weighting according to the wavelength that we're applying to the data to get that luminous transmittance calculation. So, you have to be careful.
Absolutely. There are other kinds of ways to look through a telescope with, there's the Herschel wedge. I remember John Dobson had developed a solar telescope, which I looked through. It was actually very enjoyable. Had an uncoated mirror, had a pre-filter that actually served as the diagonal, because it was reflective. So that was very interesting in what he developed. That didn't seem to really catch on because that Dobsonian telescope could only be used to observe the sun, which was fine. It was still an inexpensive type of telescope. What do you know about Herschel wedges, and what can you say about them?
Well, the Herschel wedge is a venerable design. It's effective. I think the only thing you have to be careful about is where the heat sink goes. I remember a friend of mine who, back in the day, this would have been 1960s or 1970s, when people still wore neckties. He was observing the sun through his telescope with a Herschel wedge, and he didn't realize it, but the exit port of the wedge actually focused the radiation that was being dumped from the optical train
Yeah.
onto his tie.
Wow.
Poof!
So you have like a fire brewing right underneath his
He
chin.
singed his
Wow.
tie. But the Herschel wedge itself, as long as there's a way of preventing that from happening, and there are ways to do that. Let's put
Sure.
it that way. And the modern wedges have been made so that that can't happen.
Right.
But I wonder whether my friend's wedge was actually a homemade one. It probably was.
I see.
But in any case, yeah, the wedge is a really effective instrument for looking at the sun in white light. Again, it has limited usability in an eclipse, because while you can safely observe the partial eclipses through that, when totality occurs, the wedge's got to get out of you have to get the wedge out of the optical train in order to be able to see the corona.
Right. You gotta have like a regular diagonal or something, or
Refocus, etc. So it's not very practical for eclipse viewing, but it's certainly good if you say are doing daily observations of the sun. Then it's a great instrument. And there are other devices. John Dobson's telescope with the uncoated optics. That was a beautiful design.
it was. It was.
I was privileged to have a good chat with John about that.
Right.
And, again, it was a really nice example of how you can take advantage of the optical properties of the glass to reduce the transmission to the point where it's safe to look at the sun.
Yes.
That image. Again, beautiful if you're doing white light observations.
Sure.
Nothing else that you can use it for.
Right.
So, the fact is that when you take a look at what people need for a solar eclipse, particularly a total solar eclipse, you've got to have the objective filter. And while the ISO standard only applies to zero magnification viewers, the transmittance levels of those filters is exactly what you need for making a safe solar filter for collecting optics, because you're reducing the radiant energy coming through the optical system to a level which in the solar image is not going to be harmful to the eye. And that's particularly important because you're now looking at a magnified image. So you've got more retina to cover, which means that you have less capacity for thermal quenching of the excess radiation, in addition to the potential photochemical problems. So, you have to have enough absorption to make the system safe.
Sure.
But luckily, it turns out that these materials are equally good for making objective filters as for the viewers.
Right.
It's just that we don't certify for them because they're not.
You
once
can't,
they go
right? Because there's just too many different combinations of telescopes and
exactly, yeah,
right.
And the other thing is that once it goes in front of the telescope objective, you're now talking about a specialized filter rather than a personal protective device, which is what the standard really addresses. But it's a good guidance anyway. And,
Sure.
It's worked out equally
It's
well.
worked out so far. That's true. That's true. Well, I know that you're probably going to be out seeing these eclipses in 23 and 24. What's it like to go out with Dr. Ralph Chou, the world's leading expert on safety, and do an eclipse experience? What do you use? What do you do?
Well, I take a small refractor, and I've got uh, a DSLR, and most recently I acquired a mirrorless camera, which is even better because now I don't have to worry about uh, mirror slap.
Right.
And so I will have that with me for 23 and for 24.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got my little portable mounting that I mounted on to take with me. And inevitably for the people who are around me, I'll tell them when it's safe to take the filters off, and when you have to get the filter back on and all of that. I'm always the gatekeeper, as it were, when
Right.
I have my, when I travel in a group. And I almost always travel in a group to see eclipses. It's very rare that I go on my own per se, just simply because it's more fun to be around people.
Oh, absolutely.
Experience.
Absolutely. The watching other people experience an eclipse, I think, is as gratifying as seeing it directly yourself. I can't imagine being alone and just seeing this and not being able to share that experience with somebody. So there's just kind of that innate desire for, I think, most people to do that. You're and I've seen photos of your setup and all the rest of it, and I was just curious if there was anything special, if there was any magic pixie dust that you're using to get the best experience or whatever.
One of the things I've learned, the total eclipse off of Australia next year will be my 20th.
Wow. Okay.
I've seen about 30 odd eclipses, solar eclipses of various sorts over the years. But the one thing that I always remember to do is step back, get my eye out of the camera, and look up.
And check it out. Yes.
Check it out with my eyes instead of through the viewfinder on the camera. That's one thing that a lot of people sometimes forget in the heat of the moment.
Yes.
It's interesting to see the images that you're taking and get that magnified view through the telescope. But there's nothing that beats actually looking up in the sky and seeing the whole thing laid out in front of you. It is
that big,
absolutely
the 360-degree sunset, the gradient of the sky, the color change, the temperature change, all these effects. It is an incredible, amazing experience. I've only experienced 3 total eclipses. I can't wait to see more. It is, you can understand why people go to see eclipse after eclipse once you've experienced one. So,
that's for sure. And each one is different. The surroundings, the circumstances, the location. Each eclipse has its unique qualities, and you think back on each one of them, and there are certain little things that come back to you about them. That's what makes it so fascinating and a lot of fun.
Right. Wonderful. Well, Dr. Chou, thank you for spending your afternoon with us. It's probably time for dinner for you, and I want to thank the audience for tuning in. Whether you're watching this live or you're going to watch this in replay, thanks again for sharing this information, because it's unusual to have someone with so much information and experiences, Dr. Chou. So thank you very much for spending that time with us.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, I'll end this program at this point, and we will have more Eclipse Experience programs coming up. So stay tuned.
I know.
So it's a beautiful sunny day, and we have our refractor out, and I've got my Eclipse glasses on, and I've got my safe solar filter. Of course, the eclipse is not here yet, but I wanted to take a few minutes just to show you some things about solar filter safety. The filters that we use is the Thousand Oaks material. It is rated to the highest ISO standards. And actually independently tested by us as well. So just to make sure that those standards are met. So if you're going to use a telescope to look at the partial phases, and let me underline partial phases to you. You use Eclipse glasses to observe the sun in partial phases when it's in total. If you're going to be on the path of totality, you can take the glasses off, and only during that time, which is going to be roughly 2 minutes this time on August 21st, only during that time can you directly look up at where the sun is, because it's completely blocked out. You'll see the corona, you'll see lots of really cool effects they'll leave you speechless. But during all the partial phases, you have to have safe solar filtration. So how do you do it properly? Let me show you. First off, let's show you what you shouldn't do. What you shouldn't do is put on Eclipse glasses and look through the telescope that's unfiltered. And I'll show you exactly why here. We're going to point the telescope directly at the sun. And right now, we have sunlight coming right through the eyepiece. Turn that up a little bit. If you use solar glasses and look right at the filter material, you see it's already burning. It's burning a hole right through the solar filter material. That is how powerful a telescope is. So this is definitely something you don't want to do. You can now see that there is a hole through there, and that could be your eye. So this is what can happen if you think that you can use Eclipse glasses to look through unfiltered telescopes or binoculars. If you do that, the sun's energy is going to burn right through the filter and burn right into your eye. So if you're going to use a telescope or a pair of binoculars to watch the partial phases of a total eclipse, or just to observe the sun to look for sunspots or something like that, make sure that you are using an over-the-lens solar filter that has the proper ISO safety rating and all of that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this filter on. It's you can see how snugly it's fitting here. This is not about to come off, but if you have a loose-fitting filter, use tape. Do anything that you can to make sure that the filter is not going to come off. And then the other thing is that finder scopes, optical finder scopes are like little telescopes, and they need to be filtered as well. In this case, I just have a red dot finder. There is no magnifying power to it, so I'm not going to use it to sight the sun in. The way I'm going to sight in the sun is literally I'm going to look down at the shadow and align the scope up so I'm getting the smallest shadow possible of the telescope as it's hitting the ground. And now I can safely look at the sun in comfort and look at sunspots, and if we have partial phases going on in the eclipse, I'll see them all.